Hi, and welcome to this feature today talking about the KOMA Elektronik Field Kit. And specifically today the focus is what I'm calling the Bricolage Garage. And perhaps you've noticed, but I'm actually in my garage doing this feature because I want to take you through some of the ideas that are maybe out there in terms of experimenting with the field kit, very specific to creating musical devices, using robots, using percussion instruments, creating instruments to interact with the field kit in various ways. If you saw my previous video, I talked about sensors, and in that particular video, of course, we were getting into using sensors as a way of interacting with other fields, electrical fields, light, sound, of course, motion with tilt sensors, and then in some way using that information to process audio, to use it for the purposes of controlling CV gear and so forth. So in this particular video, I won't be getting into the music side of things as much, and I'll be hopefully focusing on the creation side of things. Now, if we think about the idea of bricolage, it's a French term, and bricolage refers to a process. A bricoleur is someone who is doing this process of bricolage. One example of that might be MacGyver. If you remember the old show MacGyver, he would take bits and pieces of things to create a weapon or some kind of surveillance device or whatever to get out of a sticky situation. In many indigenous cultures, there's a tradition of bricolage in which you take something and you repurpose it. So this is an example of something totally aesthetic, and actually, I'm listening to it, right? I mean, one of the things I'll talk about today is that everything in our environment has a sonic property. Folks that do sonic engineering, that work with in doing sound design in field settings, even before the field kit, right, are familiar with going out and sonically exploring the ambient environment around you. And certainly a garage is a great place to come because you find so many interesting things, whether it's, I'm strapped into the microphone here, but you can find something as simple as a paint can, and that paint can has certain sonic principles, and you can then begin to think about how could you use this paint can to interact with the field kit to create sonic possibilities. So actually, I'm just noticing this could be interesting. It's a ceramic vase. But so it's a ceramic vase, to go back to bricolage, that has been repurposed, or maybe I should say that the magazines that are used to create the aesthetic effect, in a sense, have been repurposed. And if you look at this, you can actually see just some of the different details, right? So you can read stories, you can look at the colors and so forth. And this is a great example then of bricolage. So it's basically a technique of repurposing. A bricoleur, like the MacGyver person, as an example, is someone who is a jack of all trades. In so many indigenous cultures, they're using not just, say, something like aesthetic, but actually, creating something that maybe has a musical use. Actually, this Imbira, this thumb piano, isn't a good example, but I've seen really good ones where they would take an object of some sort. It could be a tin can, it could be an old, I'm trying to think, looking around here, some old device that maybe had a previous use, and then it gets repurposed. In a lot of cases with, say, handmade instruments, you wouldn't have perfect keys like this. It would be made from something. You could take, actually, I saw someone do this online. I don't have any hacksaw blades, but you could take blades of a saw, cut those, repurpose those, create a bridge of some sort, and a sonic chamber, and have your own thumb piano. So there's a lot of examples of bricolage in the world of, say, indigenous instrument making. People that make homemade instruments are way into this, technique. I was going to say that in one of my earlier experiments, I made a miniature device. You might remember this from, it might have been the first or second one. I'm forgetting. I've done about 8 of the sound experiments. I took a mint can and I, cut out the bottom to stick the piezo mic inside. Right? We're actually getting some sound here. Let me turn that channel off. I didn't intend for that to be going. But, so I stuck that inside, and then I attached some springs very simply, in some different ways, and then I had, you know, a mini musical instrument. I'm going to talk about later how I want to expand on that and create some new instruments in the future, but this was my first experiment. And for someone like me, I've said this in my other videos, you know, I'm not someone who is terribly good. I have a lot of background in music, in sonic design, but I'm not someone who necessarily works with, you know, tools as much as maybe some of you out there. I know a lot of people who are just very handy with creating stuff. I'll talk about some of the sound artists and bricoleurs out there who do some interesting stuff that you can actually buy their instruments online. You can buy some of their microphones. They're interesting microphones. I've used some of these in the past. And you can also learn from their videos to create your own instruments. And that's the stage I'm at right now. So let me mention something I think relative. I was trying to think of how to organize this, and I wanted to have this setting of the garage because, again, for me, thinking about you working with the Field Kit, it offers new creative possibilities. I was thinking about this today. So have you ever been in a situation where with your music you feel just in a total rut? And I feel like this sort of anxiety about working with the DAW, working with my VSTs, my virtual synths. When the process, I don't know how you do it, but the process when I sit down to write something, I have my keyboard in front of me, I open up maybe a particular virtual synth, and I mean, I'm making this video right around the holidays in 2017, so every company is like flooding my inbox with 50% off sales, and you know, I just bought some choirs and stuff like this. But I get in a situation where when I'm sitting down like that, I sort of get into, it's the equivalent of writer's block. If you're a writer, you know this, in terms of my music. In some cases, I'll use my wind instrument, my Yamaha wind instrument, and that gives me like a different opportunity to think about sound and music in some new ways. Likewise, if you're a percussionist, I'm not, you could, you know, get out your drum pads and work with those. Now, I should say today in the world of alternative controllers, you know, the Rolly, all the new ones out there that offer incredible possibility of different parameters that you can control, CC parameters, control voltage, MIDI stuff. I heard there's a new MIDI like 2.0 coming out in the future, which could be very interesting. So it's not to say that you can't be interactive and creative with your virtual synths. I just find sometimes I get in a bit of rut. So when I heard about the Field Kit, and I thought this is a new possibility, the electroacoustic hook, interacting with your environment, doing some new things with microphones. I mean, I don't know about you, but usually, unless I'm recording a vocal track and or a sound track, a narration track for one of my videos that I do, I'm rarely like using a microphone in a sonic or a creative sense. And that's why when this came along, it sort of sparked some new ideas. All of a sudden I thought I can interact with percussion in new ways. I can interact with, you know, random devices in my environment like these robots and so forth. So it just really opened up new possibilities. Now, in that sense, you know, in a previous video, I talked about a couple of these charts. One of these charts I created, and again, you can download these off my website. One of these was focused on sound interaction and feedback, and this was, I think, very specific to the use of sensors, the LFO and the mixer. So I won't be talking about that one today. This one I think is more relevant. And again, if you look at the patch sheets on the KOMA Field Kit, one of the things you can do is, I think, use the patch sheet and the 7 blocks to think about how you're going to create a sound experiment or some sort of process. So those are, I think, very handy to use. But this particular handout I did on interaction design, I think is pretty relevant to what we're talking about today with bricolage. Again, bricolage is the idea of repurposing and reusing things in some new and innovative ways. If you remember what I talked about in this chart, I discussed a context, the setup of what you want to happen. Maybe it's something involving chance operations, or it's the character of the sound. And today I was trying to think about this in a different sense. I thought, for me, there's something going on in terms of like the process or the sonic side of things. And of course, these two things overlap, right? So the process could be, I want to envision a way of using this robot in some sort of space. It could be inside a box. Maybe I have a box I want to use, like this one. And this one actually I bought specific to the Field Kit. I got this on Amazon. And actually I like the look of it. And one of the things I want to talk about today is that I'm not only interested in sound and process, I'm interested in a visual look of something, just because I like doing video experiments. With my YouTube page on immersive spaces, I'm often, doing some creative things on the side of using the camera or cameras, and also doing things in post-production, and that parallels what I'm doing, musically. But this I bought specific to working with the Field Kit on Amazon, because I like the look of it, and I thought I want to do something visually in my video using this box. It was like a few bucks. It was very cheap. But let's just say I start with that idea. I say I want to use a robot like this one, and this is a drawing robot, which I haven't used really much. In a previous video, I used this robot, which I found in the toy section at Target. One of the things I want to talk about today is the idea of thinking about your process ahead of time, doing in a sense a bit of planning, and then you can raid your garage, or you can go to the Home Depot, or if you're in Europe, it's a different store, a different home improvement store, or you could go to what we call in the States the dollar store, and I think they have these across Europe as well, and you can find very interesting things to experiment with. For example, I'll dig it out later, but I have this mini guitar that I found at the dollar store, and that was one, like, it was an inspiration. I saw it, I said, I want to do something with that. Maybe I can use it with the DC driver, the solenoid, have it tap against the strings, stick a contact mic under there, and have an experiment. And hence I did that in one of the videos you can watch. What I'm suggesting is you can start with something as simple as I want to take a box and put a robot in there, stick some contact mics in there, interact with it. Then, of course, you get into varying or subsequent stages of complexity and interaction. That's why I did this chart, because what happens is once you start with the box and the robot and one contact mic, and you have to make a decision about where to put that contact mic. And of course, there's sonically other things you can do if you're using effects with the Field Kit. And the Kickstarter, which I know is going amazing for them, I'm one of the pledged on the Kickstarter, that's going to add new sonic possibilities. And we're not even talking about all the other external things you can do, of course, with effects and so forth. And that's what is exciting. If you're using this as your building block, essentially you can build off it into these experiments. But to go back to this, if I'm using this box and I say I want a robot inside of it, and I want to stick a piezo mic on it, a contact mic, what do I then want to do with that sound? Do I want to use that in the envelope follower and then have the envelope follower do something else? CV level here on the device, or with another device I'm using in addition to the Field Kit, if this is essentially my hub. I was watching Simone the Magpie, who has a great, I'll talk about him throughout this video, but he was doing something using not the Field Kit, but he had a little doorknob or door stopper. This isn't the right kind, and actually I want to try something, but he made a very cool device using basically a guitar pedal box, and he put a contact mic on there and did some really cool things with it, and also created a way of that you could route sound inside of it. But he basically used a door stop and created this device. He did the same with his Eurorack setup, and it's a very cool. You should just check out his website, his YouTube, if you haven't. You could watch his videos for days. He's creative, he's fun, he has a passion for what he does, and that's what I love about the world of YouTube and people doing sound experiments. But so he actually does, he's created his own module that basically is it's a Eurorack module that he hooked up a springy door stopper to, and then that is going into an envelope follower, not in the Field Kit, but on his Eurorack setup. And it occurred to me that if you have a Eurorack setup, you can do a lot of the things, of course, you can do with the Field Kit, but because it's small, if you don't have a Eurorack setup, which I don't, I have semi-modular stuff, this is a great place to start. The other thing is, of course, if you're a sound artist and you want to go out into a field setting, you want to do some experiments with sound, not in a garage, but you want to go out to a factory or something like this, or out into nature. There would be a reason to take this if you could hook it up to a portable battery and then do some really cool sound experiments. But to go back to this, if this was your starting point, that gives you a sense of a story you're telling or a foundation for your sonic experiment. And that's why I was really trying to use this to say, first off, you start with the context. What do you want to happen? What do you want to create? Is there a story? Is there something with mood? A device like a robot, a spatial thing you're setting up, like this box? And then next you go into the interactive stage, and it gets more and more complex. You say, I want this one of the 7 blocks to interact with another one of the 7 blocks in real time. And then external to the field kit, I want to also use some of my CV gear or use effects pedals or use whatever, right? And then you have at some level the process side where you start thinking about patching, the design, what's going to happen during the course of your experiment. Now, when I've been doing these experiments, I try to map out what I want to do. So I typically will draw. This is one I don't think I've worked on yet. I was trying to mainly use just CV stuff and maybe the LFO from here. I haven't done this one yet. Or I did it and I didn't really like the sound of it. So I think I'm going to come back to it and redo it using more of the electroacoustic side of the field kit. We'll have to see what happens. But this was another one I did where I was using the robot and the springs and the O-coast and so forth. So what I often try to do is I make a map ahead of time so that I know where I'm going, right, with my sound experiment. For me, as I said, there's a visual element because I am interested in the look of these videos. There's a process element, which refers to things moving around or interacting, whatever those are, whether we can hear them or not. It could be the CV radio. It could be the wonderful DC interface, the driver, or it could be something else in the environment that I move, a can, or something more random like the robot. The process and the sonic side of things for me go together, right? Because often I'm doing something in a space, like if I'm having a robot move around, that's a process, but it's also a sonic thing because I'm going to do something with this box or with the robot to create a sonic effect. And then I'm going to further develop that or modify it or augment it using blocks on the field kit or using other external devices. And I should say recently I've been rethinking some things. So I'm jettisoning one looper I have and getting a new looper, and I'm getting a new reverb distortion because I had some ideas relative to using springs and creating some experimental instruments. And we'll get into this later, but you can definitely raid your local hardware store and find some cool stuff, your local craft store and so forth. And we'll get into that in a second. So as I was thinking about this today, the idea of bricolage and creating experiments with the field kit, basically there's a stage I think where I would almost call it sourcing. And this would be like if you are a film director, you go out and you do location shots or you do casting to see the actors you're going to have, and you work with your writers. So I think the sourcing in these sound experiments is figuring out what the heck do I want to use to create some sound experiments. Then I plan that out a little bit, see what I need, if I have to glue anything together, if I have to make things, maybe something involving a microphone, or we'll talk about later, I need some equipment for a DC driver, and I think we'll do an experiment today. And please excuse my mess here. The mess is actually part of the point of what I'm doing today in the Bricolage Garage. This could be like a series or something. If you remember those they're not in vogue anymore, but I used to watch like all of them. The different garage and motorcycle shows where basically a team had to create a themed vehicle of some sort. This could be that maybe, but who knows. I did think it'd be cool at some point in the future to create a sound experiment in this actual space. But so I recently got this fan. It's a DC fan. It's a 9-volt, and you've probably encountered this, but the driver, you need 9-volt, and then the sensor and then the switches are, what are they, 4.5, yes. And so obviously if you get a fan that's only rated for 4 volts or 5 volts and try to run it in the DC driver, you're going to blow it. It's going to maybe work for a little bit or won't work at all. So I finally found a 9-volt version, and this was hard to get, shipped from China. It took about a month to get here. So I thought a little later I will show you my soldering experiences, which are not extensive, and maybe we'll give this a run. What I want to do is use it, of course, with the phone, the pickup microphone, to basically plug that in, and we'll do just some sonic tests to see what that's going to sound like. So it's going to involve very simply soldering or connecting our two cords together. And this is I actually went on Amazon and bought a I don't know, 10-pack or so of these DC driver cords, right? So you have to make sure you get the right size, of course, with everything. And If you have any questions about this, there's a really good community out there for the Field Kit on Facebook, people posting their experiments and stuff. And I actually thought it'd be fun if maybe users collaborated in some sense, maybe with some Google Docs or creating their own, not patching sheets, but tip sheets or something like this. Because I think sometimes when you have to figure this out on your own, and particularly like me, you're not an electronics guy, the simplest thing, like figuring out the size of the plugs or the cords or what has to be soldered to what, it's not easy. If it's easy for you, then you have a step ahead. But for me, like getting into the world of sensors, as you saw in my sensor video, I have no electronics background. I will show you my soldering iron, but even that is totally new to me. So, it's learning just from the ground up, basically. But maybe we'll try this at the end of the video, see how that works out. Okay, so I was talking about the sourcing stage, the planning stage, and then the creating stage. So for me, the creating stage then is after I've drawn my maps out, after I've thought about what I want to do, that's the actual musical experiment. For me, one of the things I want to do eventually is to rely as little as possible in post-production. Now, it's a bit of a challenge, of course. One of the things you're limited with the Field Kit is it's a mono device. You can throw that into your favorite VST and you could do stereo spreads and whatever you want. In some cases, I've done a few of these where it sounds a little too crazy, but I think there is a need to do something for me. For me, there is a need to do things in post-production. I want to minimize that and make it as spontaneous as possible, but that's not always I'm not always able to do that, just for a variety of reasons. The other thing, before we start looking at some stuff, I wanted to say was that in one of my other videos, I talked about these Ebows method cards, and this is more from my world of spatial design, and these are specific to creating experiments for a variety of purposes. But what they did with these was they created cards that allowed groups of people or individuals to kickstart their processes. And I actually have a video on my YouTube page. If you just Google Ebows cards, you'll find it. And I talk about these. For example, this one is called the 5 Whys. And if you flip the card over, they are either learn, luck, ask, or try. So this one asks why questions in response to 5 consecutive answers. So this may not be relevant to our experiments, although this one is called collage. And if you know collage has a lot in common with bricolage or other techniques of, say, the historical avant-gardes, the Dadaists, the Surrealists. And this is asking people to build a collage from a collection of images. One of the things we could do with our experiments, right, is to create a collage of sorts, a sonic collage that builds on different things in our environment that we want to utilize to create our sonic processes. So that's an opportunity there. And what I was thinking of is perhaps someone could create a series of cards like this where you might have them based on the type of material. For example, metallic materials. Things like this. I'm going to make a ton of noise here doing this. Rulers, and I'll talk about these later, but I started to source some materials like this. So what you could almost do is you could create a series of crates in your performance space. And you could say one could be metal, another one could be springs, or you could combine metal and springs. And I somewhere have a series of springs. So what's fun about this, it's just totally chaotic in our bricolage garage. But I bought on Amazon a whole slew, like 200 springs. So like what I was saying is you could take all these and you could stick them in a box of some sort, or stick them on one part of your table and label those your metallics. Right, and then you could have another series of things, and this is just something I found in my office at work, and I used this years ago when I would do miniature archaeology digs with students to teach about excavation and archaeology. I bought these tiki treasures and never used them, and I was going through my office looking for sonic things, and I said, oh, these could be useful. And specifically, like we can listen to the sound here, right? They each have different sonic properties. These are shells. So shells sound different than metal, sound different than plastic. I also got a series of ball bearings buried in here somewhere as well, because I thought ball bearings would be really cool to use with our favorite, for me, one of my favorite devices. That's the DC driver using the solenoid, right? So, I mean, this is a really fun device to use to interact with things that, you know, move up and down or move inside a space. You hook this up and you have some real amazing possibilities once you mic it and everything. One of my experiments, I used this little springboard and some clamps. And one of the things I think you learn very quickly in doing these experiments is if you don't have a lot of the stuff, you have to buy it. So if you don't have clamps, you probably are going to need clamps of various types to hook things together, to hold your solenoid on the device you want to use. You noted in one of my experiments, I used this and basically it's just pounding up against the spring, and then I had some marbles in here, and also I tried some ball bearings. You know, sonically it wasn't like amazing or anything, and that's one of the things that I think the Field Kit encourages us to do, is to really think about doing some new experiments. You know, the next time maybe you won't use the springs, or you'll try it in a different way such that you get a different sound, and that's what's really cool about using this. Conversely, you know, I go onto the VST and I say, okay, I want to pick this particular library, and it's a sonic atmospheric library that's very ethereal, and maybe it has a randomized button, or I could create the sound and tweak it a little bit. But just for me, there's something tactile and physical and, you know, inspirational working with some of these things in our environment and having a musical or sonic potential to them. So this was one of my earlier experiments. But to get back to the IDEO cards, what I was suggesting is maybe, you know, you could create a series of cards, and you could then use this to almost alter your experiments, or to create your experiments from the ground up. It reminds me of John Cage, who, if you know, was very much influenced by the I Ching, the Book of Changes, and thinking about using nature in her manner of operation, as he often said in his writings and his, you know, speeches, as a way to create music. He used for Atlas Eclipticalis, right? He used star charts to create some random chance operations. You know, folks like Hauschka or others who are doing prepared piano stuff today are showing us some new ways to use, not in randomness per se, but sonic experiments in the realm of the prepared piano. But John Cage certainly, I think, is inspirational in getting us to think about maybe taking our mind or our forethought out of the operation of creating the music. And so you could do that by creating something like these method cards that maybe would mimic chance operations of the I Ching, as John Cage got into. So it's just something to think about. Again, I don't know if any of this will be useful for you or not, but for me it's where I'm at, like creatively thinking through some of these experiments. Okay, so I'm trying to think about where to take this next, because there's just so much stuff here. Well, let me say that often, so you know, for me, the sourcing of materials, there are, I don't know, 3 or 4 maybe different places where I might go to get materials. Now, one place could be my garage. Some of you maybe have more junk and parts lying around than I do, but if I go through, you know, any space in my garage, these are kind of interesting. Actually, these are old, from '91. I did this rock opera of sorts when I was at Indiana University, and these are the reel-to-reel tapes of that. So I have no way of playing it. And what is the magnetic life of tape? But that's actually kind of a cool find. I just had these stored in the garage. Let's make sure we don't... They're actually coming off the reel. Maybe we should leave that aside so we don't hurt it. I just wanted to show you that because I thought it was cool, but I have no way of playing it. But if you go through your garage, you will find just random items of various sorts. And maybe a place to start is just see sonically if there's anything interesting about it. A plastic bottle like this, on its own maybe is not sonically interesting, and not to say that by only tapping something you will necessarily know the sonic potentials, but that's maybe a place to start off with, or at. And again, you can just look through your space and find stuff that is interesting. Things like bolts and so forth, or old screws, could be used sonically, potentially in an experiment, or could be used creating one of the musical instruments. So I'm sort of thinking initially, what can you do sonically just with your environment? The other thing you could do And you discover, throughout this process, if you bought the expansion kit, it comes with some of the microphones. I ended up buying more contact microphones. I bought these, which are already pre-wired, and you just take the quarter out. I got some recently that are being shipped from Amazon. It was pretty cheap, I think 10 or 15 of them. And then what I was going to do when I talk about my musical instrument experiments, I also bought some of the output jacks, the quarter inch output jacks, and it'll be a simple soldering operation for me. And then I can use more of them in a permanent sense. And I also bought some epoxy. And speaking of epoxy, so I was looking for this. And specifically, this is the work of Crank Sturgeon, and I should show you. He is on Etsy, and also Perfect Circuit Audio, which is a great dealer I'm familiar with and bought stuff from in Burbank, has his stuff. And he's really great to work with. If you ever have questions, you ask him things. He is very willing to help you out, and just amazing, amazing individuals. And that's the thing, you discover a lot of these people in this community, in the sonic experiment community, are just nice, right? And they're also creative. So he makes, for example, stereo piezo contact mics. Actually, the stereo is not going to do much for me here. I could maybe do something if I split the two channels with the splitter with the field kit, but this would be great for a sonic acoustic person in the field. And he has a very nice, you could really spread these significantly, so you could do something interesting in your environment using them. I also got this passive mixer box that has some alligator clips, and I haven't really experimented with it yet. But it looks pretty cool. And then he also has this underwater contact mic, and this is probably a little beyond my, again, some people can create stuff. He does really amazing stuff. For this, right, you have to seal your piezo mic in silicone. Maybe some of you could do that. I'm a little nervous about water and electronics intermixing, so kind of trust this. But it has a really long cord, and then you could use this in a water environment. And you could use it with seltzer water, and I used some Sprite in the one sonic experiment. So that's kind of cool, just to think like you could use this to expand your musical experiments, using the microphones in some new ways. The other thing is I have a guitar pickup, and I'll talk about that. I want to maybe use that with some guitar strings in one of these musical experiments. So I think as you go through this process of thinking through what you want to create, you start to source, right? And so again, you can use the garage to source things. If you find interesting things that have sonic potentials, you can try those out. And a lot of times it's in combination, right? So maybe you find some ball bearings and you try the ball bearings or the marbles, and I just bought a big pack of marbles somewhere. The stuff is starting to spread out, but you can get a pack of marbles for $1. Obviously the marbles have a use, and you could try them out in different environments. And these are basically mini environments. You could try them out in a wooden box. You could try them out in a metal tin, sonically, what happens. You could try it out in, a frame drum or something, right? So maybe if you put them in here and they're moving around, and the combination of the piezo mic with the things moving around, depending on where you mic it, depending on if you're hitting it with a solenoid, right, you open up new possibilities. And in a sense, what you're doing with your experiments is you're multiplying the number of variables. So if one variable is the material you're using, glass versus metal, okay, well then what is this going to interact with? What type of surface or environment, in this case wood versus metal? So as you start to increase the number of variables, that's like the equivalent of patch points in a CV setup, in a modular, semi-modular setup. So that's what's really cool, is when you start to think about sourcing materials, the creativity starts to explode. You expand the possibilities of, if these could be seen as patch points or variables in a sonic experiment, you start to think about new opportunities out there. So yeah, you just start to source things. Again, if you run out of stuff in your garage, I'm not someone who has a lot of stuff in my garage. It's not huge. So, I might say I don't have anything sonically interesting. Pieces of plastic aren't going to do much for me. So then I go on a field trip, and the field trip might be to the dollar store. And in that sense, let me find the dollar store finds, or at least a few of them. I bought, for example, and I haven't figured out how to use these yet, but I bought these little craft styrofoam balls, and what I thought was these could be dampers of some sort. So if I have a marble or something hitting, maybe these would be dampers and it would alter the sound. I haven't quite, figured this out yet. Or I could take this and attach it to, maybe not the DC motor, but the solenoid, and then maybe this could hit something. And maybe for that experiment I'm doing, I want something softer hitting whatever I'm hitting. Again, you have to really think about this ahead of time, I think, before you start sourcing. Or maybe the sourcing is what inspires what's going on musically. It kind of just depends. It's really open to you in terms of your creativity. So those are those. The mini guitar, which is really crappy. Sort of has, is that like a Middle Eastern scale? Those of you with perfect pitch, but I don't know. Again, this was $1, and that's the cool thing about some of this. It's not expensive, and you can have fun with it. You could even, modify it, alter it, damage it in the process of your experiment, and it's not really going to matter. So this was something I wanted to get and try out, and I tried it in one experiment. Will I ever use it again? I don't know. And if I don't, it could go in my storage place, but I don't necessarily have to use it again. So that's a dollar store find. These are from an old game, and I just thought sonically they might be interesting in the future, but I haven't used them yet. So what I'm trying to do is I have, you can't see them, they're off camera, but I have some of those big multi-drawer, I use these for cables and for, I have probably 10 of these in the house. They sell them at the big box stores like Walmart and Target in the States, but they're like plastic drawers, and so I could put a bunch of my materials in there for storage purposes and then kind of pull it out. If you have a shop or something, you could create this whole space. If you look at Simone the Magpie, I mean, he has so many, like in his workshop areas, he's doing so much with circuit bending that, he needs a lot of drawers and spaces to hold this stuff in. So I've just started to really source things for future experiments. You're hearing the ball bearings moving around in here. So I have some ball bearings that I want to use in a future experiment. And I started to think, well, I could maybe use like a glass bottle, a spice bottle, because of its sonic possibilities. So in addition to going to the dollar store, and I think at the dollar store I got the guitar, those little mini foam balls, and I think that was about it, not much else. I ended up going to a... This actually, I used this in an experiment. This is a sanding wheel, and you could just, puncture the inside and stick that on your DC motor and have that spin and hit stuff. And so what I was thinking when I was going, in this case, I went to a craft store. I bought a bunch of they're all relatively cheap. These. For me, a craft store is a great place in the States. It'd be a Hobby Lobby or Michael's, because they have a lot of just weird stuff that you can buy. And this is an example of it. And they're not like a couple bucks a piece. So I thought this will be useful because I can take it and get my clamps, and maybe I will hook, and I did this in an experiment, right? It's really easy to just hook it up. I spoke too soon. I mean, actually these are better, and I have different size clamps that I got like at the Home Depot or Lowe's. But these are a little easier, so you can clamp that on, right? You get the point. And then I can have that interact with something else. So I thought I'll stick this on there, the sandpaper, try both sides. Again, two different variables, right? One variable is scratchy, the other one is soft, and depending on what you want to do, you could have that interact with your environment to create some sonic possibilities. I also bought these blocks and said, these will be cool for some experiment. Maybe I'll paint them or something like that, and I will either create an instrument or create a mini installation that uses some of the opportunities. Specifically, this is the DC driver territory, right? If it's anything that is involving a clamp, it's probably going to be a DC driver, unless I'm doing something maybe setting up with springs or something of that nature. So I essentially raided the craft store, and I said, I'm going to buy a bunch of stuff like this, and maybe in the future create some new mini installations and work from there. What else do we have going on in here? You can also raid your kitchen, right? So I found some plastic coffee sticks and thought, well, these will be useful in some experiment. I mean, they don't sound like anything, right? They don't really sound like anything, but maybe I'll use them with some kind of setup here. And it could be something very simple, a scratch against something, or something holding something. I don't know. I have no idea, but they will be used in the future, maybe. Again, I can source and then think about the process or think about sonically what I want to happen. Relative to the dollar store, or not dollar store, sorry, this was Hobby Lobby, they had a whole section of these, like, they're not balsa wood, they're actually cardboard, right? Cardboard houses, relatively cheap. They were on sale for $2, but they're normally $4. And what I want to do with this is, I thought, you know, maybe paint it or something and then use it for some sort of like sonic experiment that maybe is themed to some degree. Like when I did the video on the robot, you know, that's kind of the theme or the story. It's not really a story, but it's something interesting that's the centerpiece. So I thought something with a house. I don't know, maybe I will get the fan I was showing you and put the fan in there or something. I don't know, but I want to use this to create like a situation, a story, or a narrative, and then that'll be the starting point. Who knows what it's going to be? I could put springs in there. I don't know. I could put a speaker in there or something, right? And sonically create an experiment. That's also a process experiment. So that is in the future. You'll see this in the future video. I have no idea what it's going to become, but it's really fun. And again, this is the bricolage side of things, right? You're creating something new and repurposing what you have at hand. Relative to other things out there, you can also, of course, source like percussion instruments. Drums are relatively cheap. And obviously, if you get the solenoid and that is tapping up against it, right? I mean, we're not going to hook it up, but right, that'll be sonically something to think about. This gets us into, you know, another German company. They're doing currently Kickstarter or, you know, crowdfunding stuff, data machines. And I have to say, personally, I'm going to wait on that end because what they're doing essentially is going into full-fledged sonic acoustic or electroacoustic experiments, including MIDI control. Up to, I think their device has maybe 10 channels. So I could use channel 1 to create a MIDI line that then will, you know, basically do what the Field Kit is doing, but at a more complex level. There's the envelope follower, and I'm sure on your modular setup, you could hook up, you know, following the sound from the envelope follower and hooking that to MIDI. Right now, obviously, there's nothing that you can really do via MIDI. There's a ton you can do with CV. So, I mean, there's a lot out there, certainly with syncing the electronic side of things with your CV and the acoustic side of things, just using what's on the Field Kit. But the data machines, I think, is another side of this that could really be complex. Now, it gets into some difficult angles. If you've mic percussion, and I've seen a lot of the stuff they're doing with data machines involving mic percussion. Mic percussion is, I don't know, pain in the ass, right? I mean, if you've ever worked with this, if you've ever worked with drummers, if you ever try to mic percussion instruments, it is a load of work, and you're moving beyond the piezo mics in a lot of cases, right? Depending on what you're doing. So, you know, that may not be as easy as it sounds, but we'll see. The other thing is this guy here. This is also, is this Remo as well? What company does this? Yeah, it's Remo. They do a lot of this. This is, you can make one of these. There's guys online that make, sorry, I'm just checking my camera. My GoPro battery is notoriously runs out, so I'm making sure it's still running. But there are guys online that make these, and they're pretty easy. I just bought it. I think it was like $10 on Amazon, which buy a lot of stuff on Amazon. It's basically just, you know, if you took a piece of PVC and you got a long spring and you taped it with some duct tape or some really strong tape, even packing tape, it creates this, it's called a thunder drum, this effect, right? So. And you can also, you know, do some other things with it. You know, you're probably saying, well, offhand, that doesn't really relate to the Field Kit. And that's, I think, one of the things that's kind of cool about the Field Kit is that you could use in combination with the Field Kit's strengths, which would be, of course, you know, it's 7 blocks, and I'm specifically thinking the DC driver or creating feedback loops using the speaker output or whatever. But you could do some other things in a sonic environment in addition to this. And of course, you could put a contact mic on the Thunder drum or the frame drum or whatever you want, and it would work just fine. So that's kind of, the realm of traditional musical instruments. I'm trying to just put this stuff aside once we use it. Again, I already mentioned the Mbira. The thumb piano has a lot of potential for sonic experiments. The other thing is you find a lot of stuff online with using bows. And so I picked up the cheapest possible bow, which should be fine, and some rosin. Be sure to get some rosin. And I want to do some stuff in the future with strings, guitar and bass strings, and also with springs, potentially. We'll see. So with a bow instrument, of course, you can do some different things. And so I thought it'd be interesting to use the bow in some sonic experiments. If you Google, is it the Apprehension Engine or Machine? But Mark Corvin, the really amazing film composer, created this amazing electroacoustic machine that has rulers on it, and that's where I got the idea for the rulers. It has a spring reverb, and by the way, the Field Kit, the KOMA effects unit that is on Kickstarter, that just was funded way beyond their expectation, I think, or maybe they knew. I mean, I think this was really hot when it came out. But that has a built-in, if you get the expansion kit, which I signed up for, that has a spring reverb. So spring reverb itself, if you know about spring reverbs, I remember having an old Fender Twin built-in spring reverb, and just an amazing unit. I sold it years ago, but the thing was too big. But an amazing technology that's retro, that is still, I think, very relevant, particularly to the sonic world that we're existing in here. So the bow I want to use in the future, in a future experiment, and we'll see what happens with that. One thing is I actually picked up an Ebow, if you know, and these are kind of cool. So maybe let's put on our speaker, our contact mic here. Actually, we could try both of the mics to see what it sounds like. Give you a little bit of sonic experiment. Okay, so let's see. Let's just stick this on here. I'm just doing this through the air today, so you're getting not the highest quality, but hopefully you are okay with that, because sometimes, you know what, it's a pain to focus on pristine audio. So what this does is it is basically the electronic gurus out there will describe this better. That's actually a pretty cool. Do you hear that? We're getting some feedback from the speaker. Or I think it's actually, well, I think what's going on here is we're getting vibration from the speaker and the springs. So this is actually an example of what I'm talking about. It's not sonically that interesting, but I didn't intend to do that, right? So we're getting, wow, that's pretty cool. Let's move. I'm just going to make sure you can pick this up here. Okay, so I totally didn't intend this to happen, but that's pretty amazing. It almost has this, it's a drone quality to it. And then we're getting some feedback. Oh, well, what's going on is this started to vibrate. So, let's see. Changing it a little bit. Changes the character of it. Okay, anyway. I was just trying to rest that on top of the speaker, but it turned into a sound experiment. So there you go. Proof, right, of what's going on here. So I wanted to just show you the Ebow. So the idea behind this is that it's basically like a reverse guitar pickup, right? What it's doing in terms of the strings. Hauschka and really amazing people like that use these unprepared piano setups. Of course, guitarists actually use them to play guitar. But what it does is it creates a vibration. It uses a 9-volt battery, and it creates a vibration. It's going to be useful on anything metallic. So let's see if we can pick this up. Try it out. You hear that? Let's see. Let's get it over here. Let me actually I'm trying to get our contact mic in a place where I can... There we go. If I take my finger off this... Yep. So it's vibrating the metal. I will also say I went into the Home Depot. Hold that thought. I went into the Home Depot and I raided 2 sections. So I mentioned I got the entire spring collection on Amazon to make stuff with. And then I went to the Home Depot and went to their spring section. And then next to it they had metal rods. And I'm going to talk about this later, but I bought a bunch of these springs and metal rods because I thought these are going to be very useful for creating sonic experiments with contact mics, specifically when they're mounted inside of something, and I'll talk about that later. And then also they can be percussive and they can be plucked, and we can bow some of these and we can stretch them and put them on our various devices to create the sonic experiments. So I kind of got a bunch of these. And again, with the Ebow, different ones maybe have different sonic potentials to them. So let's see what this one sounds like. Higher pitched. Yep. Higher pitched. Again, sonically not interesting immediately, but you maybe see where that could go in the future in terms of some other sonic experiments. And so again, each one of these, has a different potential use or sound to it. If we try, I don't know if I've tried the ruler, maybe the metal ruler. Can't get anything with that right now, but the spring. What if we just put it on the spring? What will that sound like? Let's see. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. You get the idea, right? And of course, we can just adjust the tone of that a little bit. A bigger spring might have a different sonic potential. That sounds more like the metal rods. So anyway, that's the Ebow. And there's actually 2 positions for it in terms of how it works, but they're not particularly cheap, but it's one of those things, again, if you want to do a sonic experiment, there's potential maybe to use an Ebow in some future context. What else? Let's turn off our sound there on the mic. We don't need all that extra humming. Yeah, so I think it's maybe a good opportunity to segue. I'm just looking around. An opportunity to segue into talking about some of the other musical things that are possible, maybe creating your own mini musical instruments that could interact with the potentials of the field kit. I was going to say, as you dig through and find stuff, sometimes you will find things that you just don't know what to do with, like this prehistoric egg or seashell excavation kit. I don't know if sonically it'll be interesting, but it might look interesting in a visual sense. You just find things like that, and who knows if you'll end up using it. Old sonic devices, even I found this old Grundig, I think it's a German tape recorder, and this is pretty wild, like a field recorder, plug-in mic. You actually see these on Amazon or eBay for not much. It's one of these things when you find it, you think maybe it'll be worth something, but runs on 4 batteries, and it has these, this was the portable cassette recorder of the past, and so the microphone plugs in. This is your cassette that snaps in there. You have record, play, playback, and rewind. So I thought maybe I would record a drone or something on this using the mic, because of course with the sonic potentials of using different microphones or recording technologies, or the people out there that will hook voltage control up to a cassette deck and do some interesting things with that, making their own mini mellotron. That's kind of cool, potentially. So maybe I'll use that in the future for some sonic experiment. But specifically what I wanted to talk about was using some of the stuff here. Just trying to clear my space because I'm running out of room. When I created these spring instruments, I started thinking about what are some, bigger versions of this that I could work with. And so that got me into thinking about, again, once I got the springs, I thought, what can I do with those in creating maybe my own instrument? So initially I thought I would use this like metal box to maybe create a longer stretch of the springs and then pluck that, hook the piezo mics up to it and do some interesting things with it. I've since decided maybe I'll try that with, I think I'm going to try a new version of this based on what Simone is doing, the Magpie, on his YouTube site, more in a guitar pedal case, which you can get. The metal ones are like $7 on Amazon, and drill into there, put some springs up, and then I'm going to get longer. What I've noticed with them is they're using longer bolts, and then basically those will come out, and then I can put the springs higher up on the device and just put some nuts on it or washers, whatever, and then hold the springs in place. So this is why I recommend going to YouTube and watching some of these great video sites like Simone the Magpie. And he's probably the best out there because he shows you like start to finish what the experiment is and how you can use it. His level of like knowledge is really high, particularly with circuit bending, so I'm never striving to achieve that, but I do find like his experiments that are easy, that involve just a few things, a piezo, an input, some springs, those are really inspirational to look at. Or his door experiments that he does with the door springs, those are potentially really cool. So, the other thing I thought about, so I mentioned this, I was thinking this could be sonically interesting, because if you're creating like a chamber, you want to think about, if you're using springs or guitar strings, what kind of resonance you're going to create inside of that chamber. For example, I was thinking of, with my blue microphone, here's just a random flute. I don't know if this would have any use sonically, but potentially there's something to be done with it. But I was thinking I would take this, let me stick the GoPro here. So this is actually the case of my blue microphone, which I use to do all my main voiceovers. It's crazy when you get one of these like shipped to you. It's like this giant case. It comes with all this foam padding. It's really well packed. It's just like a beautiful box. I mean, it's one of these things where like they don't have to do this, but they do it, and it's kind of amazing. And I thought, what could I do with this? Could I repurpose this and use it for some guitar strings? Could I use it for my springs? Could I stick, and this is the apprehension engine thing, where you could attach these metal rulers. I bought these on Amazon, 3 different lengths, and I thought, like he does, Mark Corbin, have these on there and strum them so you could bolt them down to the device and create, it's not going to sound like anything now. And maybe this is not the right chamber acoustically for what we're doing here, but I could use this. I could also pluck it. I could get the bow as he does. And that's why I say if you go on YouTube, there's a wealth of information there to repurpose for yourself. And that's the spirit of Bricolage, is to repurpose some of the stuff. This is not going to do anything right now, but obviously in the future, I could use that as a sonic device or mini instrument. And then what's cool about using this is it'd be very easy to drill into here and set up my contact mics, my pizzos. And I bought a bunch of them because I thought if I make an instrument like this that I like, that I use over a series of experiments with the Field Kit or beyond the Field Kit, if I epoxy them in here, then that's going to be a lot easier. I've been using different kinds of tapes, and frankly, it doesn't really work. Like if you're using particular tapes, the microphone just falls off or whatever, particularly if things are moving around in your environment as you're working with the DC driver or whatever. So I don't know. I mean, this could work out or not. What I really wanted to do is use something like this. And there are a few folks on the internet that have created these very interesting like Soundgarden type things, where you have a series of guitar strings coming out, or a series of these rods, right? So they would essentially all be coming out of the top of it, and then, I don't know, beneath it you would have a pickup or maybe a piezo mic. Again, I'm just trying to think that through on what would work. And then this would be your device that you would interact with. So it would be less strumming it, but maybe bowing it. And then you would have the guitar strings and other devices coming out of the top, almost like a tree, right? And then you're interacting with it. There's some high-end versions of that. There's someone that sells a really cool CV unit and all. It's like $900, you know. So if you're thinking budget, you could maybe start with something like this and work your way up and create some sonic experiments. So the other thing I was going to say about that was I also thought of using this device, it's a box, and it's loaded with stuff. This is, there are companies out there that sell cigar box kits, and this is one I bought, and it was cheap. I have to say it took me a while, like it's laser cut, but it took me quite a bit of time to sand the contact points so that it would fit. It like totally didn't fit. I finally got it to fit. I got my wood glue, and I haven't put on the bottom yet for obvious reasons. But for people who create cigar box guitars, this is an opportunity. Obviously, you could use this in combination with your pickup. You know, get your tuning pegs or whatever, and do your fretboard, and you could have a cigar guitar. Cigar box guitar. That's not my interest. What I may use the pickups, I may use guitar strings, and some of the bigger springs I've been showing you, but I want this more as a sonic chamber. I think it's, you know, it has potential, certainly sonically. It's a little lower. The Spark box, right, is bigger, so maybe acoustically more, you know, it's giving us more resonance or reverb, but this I thought would be interesting. And maybe what I'll do with this is create, you know, that sort of apprehension engine type device where I might have a ruler or two on here. And again, the idea behind it is if you have the different sizes, you can get different pitches. You could bow it, you could pluck it. The other thing is, depending on how many mics you set up, right, what you discover experimenting with the piezo mics, all the different ones have different, this one's actually coming undone a little bit already, but they all have different potential uses, right? And depending on where you put the microphone, you're going to get a different sonic feel or a different different sound to it, basically. So that would be the thing to experiment with. So I thought involve springs, maybe my idea of the sonic forest where I don't have my guitar strings out here, but I would have the guitar strings coming out of the top, and then it could be more of a plucking thing, or using the bow to interact with it, or ideally using the ebow. And this is where I think the ebow, I would see it could come in handy, using all my metallic rods, springs, guitar strings, bass strings, and so forth. So that's where I'm at in terms of creating an instrument. My idea is that this could be like a go-to instrument that would interact with the field kit and also would interact with my other gear. And so that's kind of in the works, and I'm not sure where I'll be headed with that, but that's maybe the potential that we see with using some of this equipment in combination with the field kit. I'm just looking around and seeing if there's anything else. I know we've talked for a long time, and as always, of course, you can fast forward and do whatever you want. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this tour today, talking about, in our Bricolage garage, the idea of repurposing, doing sonic experiments, not just with the field kit, but with your environment, going to the craft stores, the dollar stores, the big box home improvement stores, and finding things that you can repurpose and use in your environment, maybe creating your own instruments, creating your own sonic potentials to interact with the field kit. So in any case, I'll hopefully present some future videos talking about the possibilities here using the field kit, and show you some of the musical experiments that result as well. So stay tuned for more of those videos.